So the thing that stood out for me the most in just like contemplating this like living from values, because I had a conversation with a group of people and they were really talking about, living from their values. But then I realized we're always living from our values in any given moment. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's like unconscious or conscious. And, the things that we do and we put attention toward and energy toward, whatever it may be, in that moment, that's where we're putting value. And so it's
Hmm.
interesting. The conversation is more not living from our values, but how can we intentionally live from values?
Living from the values we want to be living from.
Right. And I mean,
Yeah.
that's not to say, I mean, if I spend the whole day watching Netflix, there's nothing wrong with that. In that moment, my value is relaxing, taking care of myself, enjoying something,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And I think oftentimes when people think about values, they think about these kind of like, the sexy ones, integrity and truth and authenticity and curiosity, those ones. And those are super important too. But I think it's okay to understand that any given moment we're living from values. That's why our values aren't static. They kind of move and breathe as we do that, as we explore what things are important to us, and sometimes that can change from day to day. But I think the conversation is around how can we, like, intentionally live from our values in ways that we create these experiences and circumstances and situations that represent our core values of what we think are meaningful and important in life. That's just something that kind of popped in my brain, and really gave a little bit more depth to the conversation around values, for me at least it did.
That's interesting because the thought that I had even just this morning, or the thought that I got even more clarity to this morning, was kind of similar. That living by our values may not always be that easy for a lot of reasons, like the world we live in, but then also uh, we don't always recognize what it is we actually believe. Like,
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think it's easy to say, like, oh, I believe X, Y, and Z, but then inadvertently engage in behavior that things we've just always done that are actually like opposing that value, right? And I think we're seeing that uh, kind of chemicalizing in the world around us
Yeah.
a lot in the last couple of years. This whole like, I say I believe one thing, but then inadvertently or inadvertently, I don't know, actually practice nearly the opposite or certainly something different. And I think that's a probably the trickiest part about values is actually understanding what we believe. And I don't mean like believe like I have a faith that says I believe this, but like you have a faith that says you believe this, but do you actually believe that or do you believe something else? And for like for us, it's like we have a philosophy that believes in oneness, and yet I would probably run out of fingers if I were to count every day where I am engaging in activity that was not based in oneness. And so I value oneness, and at the same time, like, what is my understanding of oneness? Is my understanding of oneness like that, like the bumper sticker version where everything's I only see one, blah blah blah, whatever,
Yeah.
or is it like a more nuanced, detailed thing where recognizing oneness also recognizes that as part of oneness, we are here to experience life in this way, and
Yeah.
so um, I think doing that work to really get down to like, oh, what do I actually believe? What do I mean when I say I believe in oneness? What do I actually do that that what actions do I take that actually say, yeah, oh yeah, they confirm like I do believe, like deep down, my unconscious thoughts and actions and beliefs
Mhm.
actually say I believe in, or do they actually mirror the thing I'm saying? And I think
Well,
that can be tricky.
when I think you're activating, like, the key in all of this is asking those questions. So I think what happens is when we live a life where we don't ever ask ourselves questions,
Mm, yeah,
that's a red light or a red flag or whatever. I think
yeah,
really the conversation and the invitation is really curiosity. It's really, I always say curiosity, I think, is the most important spiritual practice, because really what we're asking is, in any given moment, asking ourselves these questions.
Yeah.
And then the answers to those questions, or even just the pausing and looking, invite us to really uncover things that we had been like acting in a default manner, and actually being more intentional about it. And so I think like activating that curiosity, especially with this conversation, is really important, because this conversation about values requires us to stop and to look, to listen,
Yeah.
or whatever, ask the questions, and then begin to move and shift and change and whatever,
Yeah.
as in response to those answers.
Yeah. And I think that's, there's like there is a shifting. I don't know. Do you remember like 10 or 15 years ago in like spiritual communities, everyone was talking about like the shift that's happening, the shift that's happening.
There should always be shift happening.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I've come around to. But I do think there's been, the process has been expedited over the last couple of years, I think, right? And I think the invitation, the direction of life, the direction that life is moving in is inviting us to uh, kind of step more and more into this kind of way of being, into this compassion, curiosity driven mindset. And I think what we're seeing is, for a lot of people, those default settings, those default ways of thinking, where like it used to be, I'm not trying to call anybody out, but like faith based philosophies where you believed in it. The faith says you believe in this, or you don't actually, you're not part of this faith, right? Like you believe in heaven and hell and Jesus and forgiveness of sin, right? And all that kind of stuff. Saying it is enough. It seemed, right? It would seem like whether we actually did those things Monday through Saturday mattered much less than whether we said those things 7 days a week, or even just Sundays or whatever, right? I think what we're seeing now is saying those things isn't enough. Even if you say it every day, if you are living in a way that doesn't actually back that as a real belief, I think the world is like showing us that's not enough anymore. If it was enough before, it's not enough now. And so we're being invited into actually practicing the beliefs we say, or acknowledging the beliefs we have that we are acting on, and then probably changing them accordingly. That it's not, those things aren't okay, right? So I think there really is this, as complex as it might be at times, I think there is this simple push forward that's like, no, you actually have to, if you say you believe something, you actually need to act in that way, or stop saying it and recognize what it is you actually believe.
Well, I think I don't know about you, but it's a sense of urgency. I think there's a sense of
Yeah,
urgency as we see things unfolding in our outward experience, that, hey,
I feel a sense of urgency.
yeah, I mean, hey, we need to we can no longer say we believe in oneness or wholeness or love or all those things, and not actually begin to move in the world in a way
Yes.
that creates positive change. We can't, I think there's an urgency that we can no longer hold our values on the sideline, that we actually had to begin to activate those, because if we do not activate values, they are not values. They are just words.
Lies.
And so if you are not activating it in some way, at some form or fashion, then we have to rethink, what gives values their kind of like the
Mm,
legs, or
yeah.
whatever, is that action. It's the movement. So values aren't like this a static thing
Mm,
that sits still, but it is something that has movement, that has life. It has like breath. And so in order to do that, we have to begin to
mm,
do that in the world, and I don't do it all the time, none of us do, but it's understanding that that is when we're gonna begin to see, um, changes in the world that we desperately need in this moment,
yeah.
systems and frameworks. That is when we're gonna see, creation of these systems that recognize the value of everyone. um and, it is this I do, I feel the sense of urgency when they're marginalized and disempowered people groups, this is the call for us to begin to live the values and to really encourage other people to do the same, right? I mean, to like really start banding together as communities. And how can we show up in the world in a really powerful way and say, no, we're not going to sit on the sidelines anymore. We need to begin to be active participants in what's going on and in actually activating these values.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna remove myself from the soapbox now, but yeah, it's
No, but
something that's really
what a
important.
soapbox to be on. I love this question um, from Abe in the chat here. How do I show up in the world where there appears to be a lot of pain and suffering and injustice? Yeah, and I think that's a really good question to even just ponder. I don't know if that's a looking for an answer or if this is a question like how do I show up in the world where there appears to be like, yeah, I think what an awesome question for each of us to be asking, because I'm pretty sure I know. I'm going to say I think we've gone society in general has gone through the last many decades trying to ignore the fact that there is suffering and pain and injustice because it doesn't go along with our country's values, like right, like the things that we say as a country, whoever we are and whoever has decided that these are the things we believe and value. They say these are our values, and so we're all supposed to believe, oh, these are our values, and pain and suffering and injustice doesn't go along with those values, so that can't be, because we say we believe in these things, and yet here we are, our actions as a country, as a society, are totally opposite to what those values have been.
And that speaks to what you were talking about, alignment. So that is the power. When we bring our actions into alignment with our values, then that congruence is what actually creates the change. And so I think
Yes.
that to begin to answer this question, one, to ask the question is the first step, but to begin to think, okay, like in my little sphere, like how can I show up in a way that is in alignment with my value? And I would posit that each of us, aligning ourselves with those values, I think that's what creates the change, right? When we all make that shift and begin to ask the questions and begin to act in ways that maybe we hadn't acted before, or show up in ways we haven't shown up before, then we begin to, it's kind of like an experiment. Like if I make these changes and that brings my life in alignment with the things that are most important with me, that outpictures in the world. And then that outpictures, and then that outpictures, and then it becomes um, this kind of lasting change. And then when my values, um, and I think people, some people talk about, well, what if people's values are this, and they're harmful for others? Well, I'd say if your values are harming others, then you probably have to relook at your values, because I think that that is the truth of these things, that they only uplift. They do not harm. They do not disempower. They do not marginalize, but they're only working for our collective good and support, and creating safe and brave spaces for people to be their authentic selves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think also important to note on that, if you are, if you were unintentionally living by values that harm other people and it's brought to your awareness, most people are going to realize that and attempt at least to shift and change their values and live by different values. If that's brought to your attention and you then intentionally engage in those behaviors, it's like it's just going to be like screaming from a mountaintop to let everybody else know to stay away. So like, yeah, you have the freedom of choice to intentionally engage in activity and values that's going to harm other people, and you're just going to shrink your world so much. Like people are going to leave in droves and you're going to isolate yourselves. And you might find communities that, I mean, there are, sad to say, there are communities out in the world that in our world, in our society right now, that are based in values that are aimed at hurting other people. And it seems like some of them are maybe getting louder, but they are just getting called out and getting isolated. And that's like the sound of a wounded animal, a dying animal, right? And so I think, yes, definitely, like, we each become more and more aware of, like, what's my influence in my little sphere and how does that influence ripple outward. I think that, and it's also important, like, there are people in the world who are being nudged to go take on, like, positions where your influence is not just this thing right
Mm.
here, but it's everywhere. It's massive. So
Yeah.
if you are one of those people, maybe spend some time with that nudge feeling and think about pursuing that, because I think it does. I think it takes all of the ways. It's not just the grassroots. It's
Yeah.
not just, we joke about world domination, right? It's not just either. It's all of those things and everything in between that we then get to see, like, oh, my influence is this. Someone else's
Yeah.
influence is this. Someone else's influence is massive, right? And so I think when we all um, get to see that and recognize that, what is our area of influence, what's our sphere of influence that our values are impacting, I find it inspiring. I mean, even just having a small sphere of influence, it's like, oh, cool, we get to be in this community and come together every week and engage in conversation where we're like, I'm not the only one, you're not the only one, we're doing this together. And look, it's literally changed our lives to have
Yeah.
this space to come together and live by values. And I mean, just the whole thing. So I guess that's another piece, is don't do this alone. Find somewhere to engage if you're not already. Like, there are people actively doing this, actively doing work that is moving things forward. And I think that's really important.
So thank you for tuning in to Truth Be Told 2.0. As we're really discussing this, the meat of it is activating these values, living from these values. And we know shifting from mere words or ideas or thoughts and really beginning to live, move, and breathe from these spaces. And so we invite you, maybe give a little homework this week to take a look at where in your life this week you can activate some of those core values, those things that are most important to you. And I can guarantee you, as you begin to activate those in your life, not only will it impact your life, but all of our lives in ways that are exciting and evolutionary. There are so many exciting things happening here at Soul Evolution Collaborative. Too much to even talk about in this moment. So take a look at our website, soulevolutioncollaborative.org. You'll see all of the many events that are going on. And so we invite you to take a peek and maybe engage in some of those things. And so if we don't see you here on Thursday, we will definitely see you back here next week at Truth Be Told 2.0.